My brother actually laughed when the banker said the $320,000 trust was his. Not a nervous laugh. Not surprise. He leaned back in his chair like he'd been expecting it all along. So why was my name nowhere on the document my grandfather once told me was for both of you? And why did my dad refuse to meet my eyes when I asked Daisy? "You'll be fine," he said, like he was talking about a flat tire, not my future. Then Mr. Whitmore quietly placed a sealed envelope on the table. This account, he said, was never part of the trust. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just favoritism. Something had been planned. If you're watching from outside the US, tell me where you're from and what time it is there. And if you've ever been told something was for the family when it cost you everything, I think you'll understand this story. I didn't grow up thinking my family was unfair. If anything, I thought we were one of those quietly functional families, the kind that didn't say "I love you" out loud, but showed it through stability. Bills were paid, holidays were predictable, no one yelled, no one left. It took me years to understand that silence can hide a lot. We lived in Naperville, just outside Chicago. My mom, Elaine Hayes, managed everything inside the house with a kind of quiet efficiency that never invited questions. My dad, Richard Hayes, worked in commercial insurance and believed in one thing above all else: control. Not loud control, not obvious, but the kind that shaped decisions long before you realized you were part of them. And then there was Lucas, 2 years younger than me. Easier in every way. He didn't push, didn't question, didn't argue. If something didn't go his way, he shrugged and moved on, or more accurately, someone made sure it eventually did. I was the opposite. I asked questions. I noticed patterns. I kept track of things: who said what, who promised, what changed and when. Not because I didn't trust them, just because I liked things to make sense. That difference didn't seem important when we were kids. But it started to matter when money entered the picture. I got my first job at 16. Nothing dramatic, just weekend shifts at a local cafe, but I liked having my own income. I saved most of it. Paid for my own books senior year. By the time I left for college, I had a system. Budgeting, spreadsheets, projections. It wasn't exciting, but it gave me control. Lucas never needed a system. When he wanted a new laptop, he got one. When his car broke down, it was replaced within a week. When I asked about help with tuition, my dad would sit me down and explain how figuring things out builds character. "You're strong, Daisy," he'd say. "You don't need the same kind of support." At 18, that sounded like a compliment. At 22, with student loans stacking interest, it started to feel like something else. The only person who ever made me question that narrative was my grandfather. George Hayes didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. He had built most of what my dad managed to maintain: real estate investments, long-term accounts, things that required patience instead of control. And for reasons I never fully understood, he trusted me. Not emotionally, not in some sentimental grandfather-granddaughter way. He trusted how I thought. When I was in college, he started asking me to sit with him when he reviewed financial statements. At first, I assumed he just wanted company, but then he'd ask questions. "What do you notice about this account? Why do you think this allocation changed? What would you do differently?" He didn't correct me much, just listened. And once toward the end of one of those afternoons, he said something that stuck with me. "I've set things up so neither of you has to struggle the way I did." Neither of you. I remember that clearly because I asked him to repeat it. "You mean Lucas and me?" He nodded. Fair doesn't always look equal, but it should feel right. At the time, I didn't think to question what feel right meant. I assumed it meant balance. A few months later, he asked me to sign something. It wasn't unusual. By then, I had signed as a witness on a few minor documents. Nothing complex, mostly confirmations that I had been present during discussions. That day, he explained it briefly. "Just acknowledging you've reviewed certain documents with me." I skimmed it. Saw familiar terms trust beneficiary allocation. My name was there. Lucas's name was there. Nothing looked wrong, so I signed. I didn't think about it again. Not when I graduated. Not when I moved to Chicago and started working in compliance. Not even when my dad started getting more involved in managing my grandfather's affairs as his health declined. But there was one moment, one small, almost forgettable moment that came back to me the second I saw Lucas smiling in that bank conference room. It was Thanksgiving, maybe 4 years ago. The house was loud in that controlled way families get when they're trying to seem relaxed. Football on in the background, plates clinking. My mom moving between rooms like everything depended on timing. I had gone upstairs to grab my phone and paused near the hallway because I heard voices. My parents. It makes more sense this way, my dad was saying. And Daisy, my mom, asked. She'll be fine, he replied. She always is. There was a pause. Then quieter almost, like he didn't want the words to fully exist. We'll rebalance things later if we need to. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Probably about investments, maybe retirement accounts. I didn't walk in. I didn't ask. I went back downstairs and finished dinner like I hadn't heard anything. Because that's what we did in our family. We didn't confront things unless they were undeniable. Sitting in that bank room years later watching Lucas accept something that was supposed to include me, I realized something else. Nothing about this was sudden. This had been decided a long time ago, and I had been part of it whether I understood it or not. Because as I replayed that document in my head, the one I signed for my grandfather, one detail started to surface. Not the words, not the numbers, the structure. There had been a section I didn't fully read. A reference to a final adjustment that would be executed later. At the time, it didn't matter. Now it was the only thing that did. I went back to my apartment that night and opened my laptop. If I had signed something that allowed this to happen, I needed to know exactly what it was. Because whatever my father had planned, I was starting to think my grandfather had planned something too. And those two plans might not be the same. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was emotional. That came later. What kept me awake was something else. The feeling that I had missed a step in a process I should have understood. And that bothered me more than anything my brother said in that room. By 6 a.m, I was at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a notebook beside me, and a list of every account document and interaction I could remember involving my grandfather's finances. This wasn't personal anymore. It was a reconstruction. Working in compliance teaches you one thing early. People don't get caught by what they say. They get caught by what they document. And more importantly, by what they don't. I started with my email archives. Search terms Hayes Trust. Grandpa, allocation, beneficiary. Hundreds of results. Most of them were routine. Notifications, calendar invites, occasional forwarded statements my dad had looped me into years ago. Nothing unusual on the surface. But patterns started to emerge. There was a period about 8 months before my grandfather passed where I was copied on fewer and fewer emails. Not abruptly, gradually. Subtly enough that I hadn't noticed it happening in real time. Until now, I circled that time frame in my notebook. Then I filtered everything to just those months. That's when I found the first thing that didn't sit right. An email from a financial advisor I barely remembered, someone named R. Callahan. Subject line, re-education allocation adjustment. It wasn't sent to me directly. I was CC'd. The body was short. Per Richard's request, we can proceed with the revised beneficiary structure. Final acknowledgement will require signatures already discussed. Let me know when you'd like us to finalize. No attachment, no explanation. Just enough to confirm something had been changed, and that my dad had initiated it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Revised beneficiary structure. That wasn't ambiguous. That was deliberate. I scrolled down. There was a reply from my dad. Let's move forward. Keep documentation streamlined. Daisy has already reviewed what she needs to. I read that line 3 times. Streamlined. Reviewed what she needs to. It didn't say I had agreed. It didn't say I understood, just that I had reviewed, which technically was true. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not shock, recognition. I opened a new tab and started searching my old cloud backups. If that advisor had referenced final acknowledgement, there had to be a document somewhere, something I signed, something they used. It took almost an hour. Different folders, old hard drive syncs, archived downloads. Then I found it. A file buried inside a folder labeled Tax Docs, College. The name made me pause. Why would anything related to a trust adjustment be stored with tax documents? I clicked it. Hayes Trust Adjustment Final, DIDA. Locked. Of course it was. I exhaled slowly and checked the file properties. Created June 14th. Modified September 3rd. My grandfather passed on August 22nd. I stared at the dates. The document had been changed after he died. That alone didn't prove anything illegal. Documents can be finalized posthumously depending on structure. But it meant one thing clearly. What I signed was not necessarily what this file contained now. I grabbed my phone and called the only person I trusted to look at this without emotional bias. Maya. She picked up on the second ring. You're up early, she said. I need a favor, I replied. That sounds serious. It is. I explained everything in pieces. Not dramatically, just facts. Timeline, email, file. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, send me the PDF. It's locked. That's fine. Send it anyway. I forwarded it and waited. I could hear typing on her end. A few minutes passed. Then, okay, this is interesting. Good interesting or bad interesting. Depends on your definition, she said. The lock is superficial. It's not fully encrypted. More like restricted viewing. Can you open it? Not directly. But I can try pulling a cached version if your system ever previewed it before. That made me sit up straighter. Would it? If you opened it even briefly, your system might have stored a partial render. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to remember. Had I ever opened it before? Maybe. Maybe not. Try, I said. More typing. Then silence. Longer this time. Long enough for my mind to start filling in possibilities I didn't want to consider. Finally, Maya spoke again. I've got something. My pulse picked up. It's incomplete, she added. Looks like a partial render. Missing a few pages. That's fine. What does it show? Another pause. Daisy, your name is on this. I know. I signed something. No, she said carefully. I mean, your name is on a specific section. What section? The beneficiary acknowledgement. My grip tightened on the edge of the table. What does it say? It says you acknowledge and accept the revised allocation structure as presented. I didn't respond, because that wasn't what I remembered. At all. I wouldn't have signed that, I said quietly. I figured, Maya replied, but it gets weirder. How? There's a reference to a supplemental instruction. My eyes opened. What kind of instruction? It doesn't show the full text, she said, just a line. Final beneficiary designation subject to supplemental account directive. A directive, not an attachment, not a note, something separate. Is there a page for it? I asked. Not in this render. It looks like it was either excluded or stored separately. I stood up and started pacing without realizing it. A supplemental account directive. That wasn't normal. Not for a standard trust adjustment. Daisy, Maya said, her voice sharper now. This doesn't look like a clean reallocation. It looks layered. Layered how? Like someone set up a primary outcome and then tied it to a secondary condition. I stopped pacing. My mind went straight back to the conference room, to the envelope, to Mr. Whitmore's voice. This account was never part of the trust. I swallowed. Maya, what if the trust isn't the whole picture? That's exactly what I'm thinking, she said. I looked back at my laptop, at the file name, at the dates, at the gap between what I remembered signing and what this document now represented. This wasn't just changed, I said slowly. It was designed. For what Maya asked, I thought about my grandfather. The way he asked questions instead of giving answers. The way he trusted processes over promises. The way he said fairness should feel right. And for the first time since that meeting, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not confusion. Focus! I don't know yet, I said. But I think he expected this to happen. There was silence on the line. Then Maya said, if that's true, then whatever this supplemental directive is, it matters more than the trust I finished. And suddenly the envelope on that table didn't feel like an afterthought. It felt like the point. I asked Maya to send me everything she could extract, even if it looked incomplete or out of order. Already compiling it, she said. But Daisy, you need to be careful how you use this. I know, I replied. This isn't proof yet. It's direction, she said. Exactly. By mid-morning, I had 3 things in front of me. The partial render of the PDF, the email from R. Callahan, and my own notes mapping the timeline. I treated it like a case file, because that's what it had become. The acknowledgement section was the most important piece. It carried my name, my signature, and a statement that I accepted a revised allocation structure. But the language was generic. Too generic. No numbers, no specific percentages, no mention of Lucas receiving everything. That was unusual. Any legitimate financial acknowledgement tied to a beneficiary change would specify the actual distribution, not just refer to it vaguely, which meant one of 2 things. Either the full details were in the missing pages, or the document I signed was never meant to show the full details in the first place. I circled the phrase supplemental account directive in my notebook. That wasn't standard language either. I opened my laptop again and searched through industry templates and documentation structures. In most cases, a supplemental directive meant a separate instruction, something that could override or refine the primary document under certain conditions. Layered, just like Maya said. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Karen Doyle. We should talk before things escalate. I stared at it for a second. That phrasing told me everything I needed to know. Not clarify, not explain. Escalate. She already saw where this was going. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove back to Naperville. I hadn't planned to confront anyone that day. That wasn't the goal. I needed context. And context in my family lived in places people forgot about. The house hadn't changed much. Same neutral tones. Same quiet order. Same feeling that everything had its place, including conversations that were never meant to happen. My mom was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked surprised but not alarmed. You didn't call, she said. I didn't think I needed to. She wiped her hands on a towel and studied my face. This is about yesterday. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Can we talk? She hesitated for just a second before gesturing toward the dining room. We sat across from each other at the same table, where we'd had years of careful, controlled conversations. I didn't start with accusations. I started with something simple. When did you and Dad decide to change the trust? Her expression didn't shift much, but her eyes gave something away. Relief. Not because I knew, because I didn't know everything. It wasn't like that, she said. Then what was it like? She folded her hands. Your father was worried about Lucas, she said. He didn't think your brother would recover if things didn't go his way. Recover from what I asked. She didn't answer immediately. That's not the point, she said finally. It is if you used it to justify taking something that wasn't yours to decide. Her jaw tightened. We didn't take anything from you, Daisy. I let that sit between us for a second. Then, why did I sign a document acknowledging a change I didn't understand? That landed. She looked down at the table. You were there when your grandfather explained things. He didn't explain this, I said quietly. Not the way it ended up. Another pause. Then she said something that shifted everything slightly, not enough to change the outcome, but enough to reveal intent. We simplified it, she said. I felt my pulse slow, not speed up, because that word matched the email. Streamlined. Simplified. Who is we, I asked. She hesitated again. Your father and the advisor. R. Callahan. Her eyes flicked up. That was my answer. Did Grandpa approve that I asked? She didn't respond. Which was also an answer. I leaned back in my chair. So you removed details from what I saw, I said. And expected me to sign anyway. It wasn't like that, she repeated, but this time it sounded thinner. Then explain it to me. She looked tired now. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. We thought it would be easier, she said. For who? For everyone, she replied. You don't depend on us the way Lucas does. You never have." There it was again. The same logic. The same justification. "You decided I didn't need it," I said. "We decided you'd be okay," she corrected. "That's not the same thing." Silence settled between us. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that comes when both people know the conversation has crossed a line it won't come back from. I stood up. "I'm not here to argue about fairness," I said. "I'm here to understand the structure." She looked up at me. "What does that mean?" "It means there's more to this than the trust," I said. Something flickered across her face. Small, fast, but real. "What do you mean?" she asked. I held her gaze. "There was a supplemental directive," I said. "Separate from the document I signed." She didn't answer, didn't deny it either. Just looked at me like she was deciding how much I already knew. That hesitation confirmed it. There was something else, something they hadn't told me, something they either didn't understand or didn't control. I picked up my bag. "This isn't over," I said. "Daisy," she started. But I was already walking out, because for the first time I wasn't trying to prove they were wrong. I was trying to figure out what my grandfather had set in motion, and why. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from an unknown number. "Ms. Hayes, this is Daniel Whitmore. We need to schedule a formal review. The secondary account requires both parties present." Both parties. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the house, at everything I thought I understood. And for the first time, I wasn't just questioning my family's decisions. I was questioning whether they had ever been in control of this at all. I didn't respond to Mr. Whitmore right away. Not because I was unsure, but because timing mattered now. Everything about this situation had been controlled through timing. When I was informed, what I was shown, what I was allowed to understand before I signed anything. I wasn't going to walk into the next step without setting my own pace. I went back to Chicago and spent the rest of the afternoon organizing what I had. 3 categories. What I knew, what I could prove, what I still needed. Under what I knew I wrote, the trust had been adjusted at my father's request. I signed an acknowledgement without full disclosure. Lucas knew about the change before I did. There was a second account tied to a supplemental directive. Under what I could prove, I listed the email from R. Callahan referencing the revised beneficiary structure. The wording in my dad's reply, I keep documentation streamlined. The metadata showing the document was modified after my grandfather's death. The partial render confirming my signature tied to vague language. And under what I still needed, I wrote one line. The full terms of the supplemental account. Everything else was secondary. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Whitmore. He answered immediately. "Ms. Hayes." "Mr. Whitmore," I said, "you mentioned a formal review." "Yes. You said both parties need to be present." "That's correct. Define both parties." There was a brief pause, like he was choosing his words carefully. "You and your brother," he said. "Not my father, not my mother. Just us." Why, I asked. "Because the directive applies specifically to the designated grandchildren," he replied. I leaned back in my chair. "That wasn't an accident, was it?" "No," he said. "Of course it wasn't." "When can this review happen?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "We've already notified the others." The others. So Lucas already knew. I almost laughed at that. Of course he did. "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I didn't feel anxious. I felt steady. For the first time since that meeting, I wasn't reacting. I was stepping into something my grandfather had already structured. And I had a feeling he had structured it for a reason. The next morning, the conference room felt different. Same table, same chairs, same glass walls. But the dynamic had shifted. Lucas was already there when I walked in. He looked less relaxed than the day before. Still confident, but not casual. That mattered. My dad sat beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. My mom was quiet, watching everything. Karen Doyle had a folder in front of her, but she didn't open it. And Mr. Whitmore stood at the head of the table, composed as ever. "Thank you for coming," he said. No one responded. He didn't seem to expect them to. This meeting, he continued, is to formally review a supplemental account directive established by Mr. George Hayes prior to his passing. He placed the sealed envelope on the table again. This time, no one looked away from it. Before we proceed, he said, I need to confirm that both designated parties are present. He looked at me, then at Lucas. We both nodded. Good, he said. My dad leaned forward slightly. Daniel, we already resolved the trust, he said. There's no need to complicate. This is not related to the trust, Mr. Whitmore said calmly. That shut him up. Completely. Mr. Whitmore picked up the envelope, broke the seal, and removed a set of documents. He didn't rush. Didn't dramatize it. Just turned to the first page and began. This account, he said, was established as a contingency structure. Its purpose was to ensure that final distribution aligned with the original intent of the account holder. Original intent, not revised, not adjusted. Original. I felt my focus sharpen. Lucas shifted in his chair. What kind of account is it? He asked. Mr. Whitmore glanced at him briefly. A restricted inheritance account, he said. With conditional eligibility. Lucas frowned. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Whitmore replied, that access is determined not just by designation but by conduct. The room went still. I didn't move, didn't speak, because I already understood what that implied. My dad didn't. That's not standard, he said. It's not common, Mr. Whitmore corrected, but it is valid. He turned a page. The directive outlined specific disqualifying conditions. Lucas let out a small, impatient breath. Okay, so who qualifies? Mr. Whitmore didn't answer immediately. Instead, he read directly from the document. Any beneficiary who knowingly participates in benefits from or fails to disclose material changes to the primary trust structure shall be deemed ineligible. The words landed slowly, not because they were complicated, because they were precise. I watched Lucas's expression change. Not panic. Not yet, but something close to it. What does that mean? He asked more quietly this time. It means Mr. Whitmore said that eligibility is contingent on non-involvement in the alteration of the original trust. Lucas shook his head slightly. I didn't alter anything. No, Mr. Whitmore said. But you did sign an acknowledgement confirming awareness of the revised allocation. Silence. Heavy. Complete. I didn't look at my brother. I didn't need to, because I already knew what this meant. But I needed to hear it. Clearly, officially. Lucas leaned forward. That doesn't mean I'm disqualified, he said. Mr. Whitmore closed the folder gently. It does, he said. The room didn't react all at once. It fractured. My dad sat up straight like he'd been physically pushed. That's not how this works, he said sharply. It is exactly how this works, Mr. Whitmore replied. You can't penalize him for following instructions. This directive was not created to reward compliance, Mr. Whitmore said. It was created to identify awareness. That hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't about what Lucas did. It was about what he knew and chose not to question. Lucas looked at me then. For the first time since this started, there was no arrogance in his expression. Just something uncertain. Daisy, he started. But I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about me speaking. It was about the structure unfolding exactly the way it was designed to. Mr. Whitmore turned to me. Ms. Hayes, he said, your eligibility is not automatically assumed. Of course it wasn't. You must demonstrate that your acknowledgement was not made with full knowledge of the material changes. I nodded. I can. My voice was steady, not emotional, not defensive, just certain. Because now, finally, everything I had been piecing together had a place, a purpose, and a direction. Lucas leaned back in his chair, the confidence from yesterday completely gone. This is insane, he muttered. But no one agreed with him. Not anymore. Because for the first time since that trust was handed over, the outcome wasn't controlled by my father. It wasn't shaped by assumptions about who needed what. It was being decided by something much harder to manipulate. Evidence and awareness. And as Mr. Whitmore set the next document on the table, I realized something else. This wasn't the end of the process. It was the beginning of the part my grandfather actually cared about. The room didn't settle after that. It tightened. You could feel it in the way no one reached for water, in the way even Karen Doyle kept her hands still on the folder in front of her. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a shift in control, and everyone knew it. My father was the first to speak again. "This is a technicality," Richard said, his voice sharper now. "Lucas didn't design anything. He didn't manipulate anything. He followed the process that was presented to him." Mr. Whitmore didn't respond immediately. He simply looked down at the document in front of him, then back up. "The directive does not assess who designed the change," he said. "It assesses who understood it." That word again. Understood. Lucas let out a breath through his nose, frustrated. "You're twisting this," he said. "I didn't understand anything. I signed what I was told to sign." I watched him carefully, because that wasn't entirely true. Not from what I'd seen. "You knew the allocation changed," I said. He looked at me defensive. "I knew it was being adjusted," he said. "That doesn't mean I knew every detail, but you knew it wasn't the same," I said. He didn't answer. That silence said enough. Mr. Whitmore turned a page. "For clarity," he said, "we have documentation indicating that Mr. Lucas Hayes acknowledged awareness of a revised beneficiary structure prior to the execution of student loan agreements by Ms. Daisy Hayes." My father shifted in his seat. "That doesn't prove intent," he said. No, Mr. Whitmore agreed. "It establishes sequence, and sequence mattered. In compliance, sequence is everything. It tells you who knew what and when they knew it." I leaned forward slightly. "I have something that adds context to that sequence," I said. All eyes turned to me. I slid a printed copy of the email across the table, the one from R. Callahan. "Read the second line," I said. Lucas picked it up first. His eyes moved quickly, then slowed. "Per Richard's request, we can proceed with the revised beneficiary structure," he read under his breath. My father didn't look at the paper. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said. And the reply I added. Lucas flipped the page. "Keep documentation streamlined. Daisy has already reviewed what she needs to." He looked up. "Not at me. At my father." "This doesn't say I knew anything," Lucas said quickly. "It says I didn't," I replied. That landed. Because the difference mattered. A lot. Mr. Whitmore nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "This supports the claim that Ms. Hayes was not provided full disclosure," he said. My father leaned forward again, this time more controlled. "You're interpreting that," he said. "That's not definitive." "Then let's add definitive," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out another document, the metadata summary Maya had helped me generate. "The file containing the final adjustment," I said, placing it on the table, "was modified after my grandfather passed." Karen Doyle finally moved, picking it up. She scanned it quickly. "Posthumous finalization isn't unusual," she said. "I agree," I replied, "but content changes are." She looked at me more carefully now. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," I said evenly, "that what I signed and what this document became are not the same thing." Silence again, heavier this time, because now it wasn't just about fairness. It was about process integrity. Mr. Whitmore spoke next. "If the acknowledgement was obtained without full disclosure, its weight in determining eligibility is limited," he said. My father shook his head. "This is getting out of control," he said. "We're turning a simple decision into a legal circus." "It was never simple," I said quietly. He looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not authority. Not certainty. "Calculation." "You're doing this for the money," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was almost disappointed, like he needed that to be true. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "I'm doing this because you decided for me." That didn't break him, but it shifted something. Lucas rubbed his face with both hands, exhaling hard. "This is insane," he said, again softer now. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No," I said. "You accepted it." He looked at me, something conflicted in his eyes. "That's not the same." "It is when you know enough to question it," I replied. He didn't argue that, because he couldn't. Mr. Whitmore closed the folder in front of him. "At this stage," he said, "we have sufficient indication that Ms. Hayes may meet the non-involvement criteria." May, not certainty. Not yet. My pulse stayed steady. "What do you need to confirm it?" I asked. Verification of your awareness at the time of signing, he said. Specifically, whether you had access to full material details? I didn't, I said. I understand your position, he replied. We need documentation. Of course we did. This wasn't about belief. It was about proof, Karen Doyle spoke up. There are limits to what can be reconstructed, she said. We're talking about internal discussions, interpretations. There's an email I said cutting in, from my father to the advisor. It explicitly states that information was limited. Karen looked at my father. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. But his silence was louder than anything he could have said. Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly. If that email is authenticated, it will carry significant weight, he said. Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. Then he let out a short, humorless laugh. So what? I get penalized for knowing something and she gets rewarded for not knowing it, he said. No, Mr. Whitmore replied. You are evaluated based on awareness. She is evaluated based on lack of informed consent. Lucas looked at him. That sounds like the same thing. It's not, I said. He turned to me. How? Because you had the opportunity to question it, I said. And I didn't. He held my gaze. For a second, it looked like he might argue. Then he looked away, because somewhere in all of this, he knew that was true. Mr. Whitmore gathered the documents into a neat stack. We will proceed with verification, he said. A final determination will be made once all supporting materials are reviewed. Not today. Of course not. Processes like this never end in a single meeting. But something had already changed. The assumption that Lucas would walk away with everything, that was gone. The certainty my father walked in with, gone too. And for the first time since this started, the outcome wasn't being decided in that room. It was being built, piece by piece, through evidence, through sequence, through intent. As everyone began to stand, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Lucas didn't look confident. He looked uncertain, not about the money, about the story he had been told. And my father, he didn't look angry. He looked like he was recalculating. That worried me more than anything else. Because if there was one thing I knew about him, it was that he didn't let go of control easily. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed. A new email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, supplemental directive, supporting correspondence archived. I stopped, opened it, and as the first line loaded on my screen, I felt that same cold clarity settle in my chest again. Because this time, it wasn't just about what had been hidden from me. It was about what my grandfather had documented, just in case someone tried to hide it. I didn't open the email right away. Not in the hallway. Not with my family still close enough to see my screen if they looked over my shoulder. Timing mattered. I walked out of the building, crossed the street, and sat in my car before unlocking my phone again. For a moment, I just stared at the subject line. Supplemental directive. Supporting correspondence archived. Archived. That meant it wasn't meant for circulation. It meant someone had preserved it. Carefully, I opened it. No greeting. No signature at the top. Just a forwarded thread, dates, timestamps, and a chain of correspondence between my grandfather and the advisor R. Callahan. The first message was from my grandfather. Clear, direct. Exactly how I remembered him. If any adjustment is made to the primary trust without full disclosure to both beneficiaries, the secondary account must be evaluated independently. Awareness is the deciding factor, not compliance. I exhaled slowly. There it was. Not implied, not interpreted. Defined. I scrolled. The next message was from Callahan. Understood. To confirm any beneficiary who is aware of a revised allocation prior to execution will be considered informed regardless of whether they initiated the change. My grandfather's reply came minutes later. Yes, awareness without objection is participation. I leaned back in my seat. That line settled everything in a way nothing else had. Not legally, not emotionally, structurally. Lucas didn't need to plan anything. He didn't need to manipulate anything. He just needed to know and choose not to question it. And that was enough. I kept reading. Another message weeks later. George Richard has requested limited disclosure to Daisy during the acknowledgement phase. Please confirm how you'd like us to proceed. I felt my grip tighten slightly around my phone. That was the moment. The pivot. The point where everything could have gone one of two ways. My grandfather's response came the next morning. Proceed as requested. Documentation will reflect sequence. I closed my eyes briefly. He had known. Not guessed. Not suspected. Known? He had allowed it to happen, not because he agreed with it, because he had already accounted for it. I opened my eyes and read the final message in the thread. Ensure all communications are retained. If the directive is ever triggered, clarity will matter more than assumption. Clarity, not fairness, not intention. Clarity. I locked my phone and sat there for a moment. Processing, not the outcome. That part was already shifting, but the design... My grandfather hadn't tried to prevent what my father did. He had built something that would respond to it, automatically, without needing confrontation, without needing trust, just evidence and sequence. My phone buzzed again, a message from Maya. Did you see the attachment? I opened the email again. There was a file I hadn't noticed before. Supplemental account, terms full PDF. I tapped it. This one wasn't locked. The first page loaded instantly. Account balance $740,000. I stared at the number. It wasn't just larger than the original trust. It was more than double. I scrolled. The terms were exactly as Mr. Whitmore described, but more detailed. Eligibility required. No prior acknowledgement of revised allocation with informed awareness. No direct or indirect benefit from the altered trust structure. No documented participation in limiting disclosure to other beneficiaries. I read each line slowly, carefully, because every word mattered. Then I reached the final section. Final determination clause. If both beneficiaries are deemed ineligible, funds will be redirected to a designated charitable foundation. No fallback. No secondary distribution. Either someone met the standard, or no one did. I sat back absorbing that. My grandfather hadn't guaranteed anything, not even for me. He hadn't protected me directly. He had protected the outcome from manipulation, from shortcuts, from assumptions about who deserved what. I picked up my phone and called Maya. She answered immediately. Tell me you opened it. I did, I said. Okay, so you saw the amount. I saw it. There was a pause. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I said. I think I finally understand what he was doing, which is, he wasn't choosing between us, I said. He was setting a condition neither of us could fake. Maya was quiet for a second. Do you qualify? She asked. I think so, I said, but I have to prove it. And Lucas, I glanced down at the document again. At this point, probably not. Another pause. That's going to get ugly, she said. It already is, I replied. I ended the call and started the car, but I didn't drive right away, because there was one more thing I needed to consider. My father. He hadn't reacted like someone caught off guard. He had reacted like someone recalculating. And now with this level of clarity, this level of documentation, he would know exactly where the risk was. Not in the trust. Not in the money. In the evidence. And if there was one thing I knew about him, it was that he didn't like losing control of a narrative, which meant this wasn't over, not even close, because now that the structure was clear, the only thing left was the outcome, and outcomes in my family were never left alone. I didn't tell anyone about the email. Not my parents, not Lucas, not even Karen Doyle. Only Maya knew, and that was because I needed someone who could read the document the same way I did. Without emotion, without assumption, because at this point the risk wasn't misunderstanding the structure. It was someone trying to reshape it. I spent the next few hours doing one thing, locking down everything I had. Multiple backups, encrypted copies, a version saved outside my personal devices. Another shared with Maya under a neutral file name that wouldn't draw attention. Not paranoia. Procedure. If the outcome depended on evidence, then the evidence needed to be untouchable. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon. That's when Karen called. Daisy, she said, her tone measured. We need to talk before the verification process moves forward. I leaned back in my chair. What about? A few inconsistencies we need to clarify, she said. Preferably in person. Inconsistencies, I repeated. Yes. That word wasn't random. It meant someone had already started positioning the narrative. Is this about the acknowledgement document, I asked? Partly, she said. And partly about your level of awareness at the time. There it was. Then I'll bring everything I have, I said. A brief pause. That would be helpful, she replied. We set a time for the next morning. When I hung up, I didn't feel pressure. I felt confirmation. They were already adjusting. The meeting was smaller this time. No banker, no full family. Just me, Karen Doyle, and unexpectedly my father. Lucas wasn't there. That told me this wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about control. Karen gestured for me to sit. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't respond to the formality. Let's get to it, I said. She nodded. We've reviewed the documentation presented so far, she said. There are a few areas where interpretation matters. Interpretation doesn't override sequence, I said. My father exhaled slightly like he expected that answer. Karen continued. The question isn't just what you knew, she said. It's what you reasonably should have known. I held her gaze. That's not how informed consent works, I said. No, she agreed. But it can affect eligibility under certain conditions. That depends on the directive, I replied. She studied me for a moment. You've seen it, she said. Not a question. A statement. I didn't answer directly. I've seen enough to understand how it functions, I said. That was all she needed. My father leaned forward slightly. Daisy, he said, his tone calmer than before. This doesn't have to turn into something bigger than it is. I almost smiled at that. It already is, I said. He shook his head. You're looking at this like a case, he said. It's not. It's a family decision that got complicated. No, I said. It's a structured financial instrument that got manipulated. Karen raised a hand slightly. Let's stay focused, she said. I reached into my bag and placed a printed copy of the email thread on the table. Then let's focus on this. She looked down. Read the first few lines. Then the next. Her expression didn't change much, but she didn't speak immediately either. My father didn't look at the paper. He already knew what it contained. You recognize the correspondence, I asked. Karen nodded slowly. This appears to be between your grandfather and the advisor, she said. It is, I replied. And you're aware this was archived, not part of the primary documentation set? Yes, I said. Which is why it matters. She looked up at me. Explain that. Because it defines intent, I said. Not just outcome. I tapped the line on the page. Awareness without objection is participation. That's not interpretation. That's instruction. My father shifted in his seat. That doesn't apply the way you think it does, he said. Then explain how it applies, I said. He didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't a version of that explanation that worked in his favor. Karen stepped in. The directive still requires verification, she said. This supports your position, but it doesn't finalize it. I'm not asking it to, I said. I'm establishing context. She nodded once. That's fair. There was a pause. Then my father spoke again, quieter this time. You could walk away from this, he said. I looked at him. Walk away from what? All of it, he said. The process. The conflict. He gestured vaguely, division this is causing. And what happens to the account, I asked. He didn't answer directly. It doesn't have to be about winning, he said. There it was. Not fairness. Not truth. Outcome. If I walk away, I said, the determination defaults. Karen glanced at me. You understand the clause, she said. I do, I replied. My father looked at her, then back at me. That's not what your grandfather would have wanted, he said. I held his gaze. He documented exactly what he wanted, I said. That ended that lines of argument. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Karen closed the folder in front of her. We'll proceed with formal verification, she said. This documentation will be included. I nodded. That's all I'm asking. As I stood to leave, my father spoke one more time. Daisy. I paused. You're making this irreversible, he said. I turned back to him. It already was, I said. Then I walked out. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, clearer, because for the first time there was no confusion left. No missing pieces, no assumptions. just a process moving toward a defined outcome. But as I got into my car, one thought stayed with me. Not about Lucas, not even about my father. About the clause. If both beneficiaries are deemed ineligible, the funds disappear from the family entirely, which meant something simple. This wasn't just about proving I qualified. It was about making sure no one could successfully argue that I didn't. And in my family, arguments didn't stop just because the facts were clear. They just changed shape. The formal verification wasn't scheduled like a typical meeting. There was no casual come in and we'll talk it through. It was structured, timed, documented. Every participant had a defined role, and for the first time since this started, my father wasn't the one setting the tone. Mr. Whitmore was. We were back in the same conference room, but the atmosphere had shifted again. Not tense this time, controlled. Precise. Like the outcome wasn't being debated anymore, just assembled. Lucas sat across from me, quieter than I'd ever seen him. Not defensive, not dismissive, just thinking. My father was beside him, posture straight, expression neutral, but I could see it in the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table. He was still calculating. Karen Doyle had a full file open in front of her now, and Mr. Whitmore stood at the head of the table reviewing a final set of documents. "We'll begin," he said, with a reconstruction of sequence and awareness. No one interrupted. He turned to me first. "Ms. Hayes, please confirm. At the time of your acknowledgement signature, were you provided full disclosure of the revised beneficiary allocation?" "No," I said. "Were you aware that the adjustment would result in your exclusion from the primary trust?" "No." "Were you given the opportunity to review full supporting documentation prior to signing?" "No." Each answer was simple. Direct. "Because it needed to be." He nodded and made a note. Then he turned to Lucas. "Mr. Hayes, prior to your sister's execution of her student loan agreements, were you aware that the trust allocation had been modified?" Lucas hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." "Yes," he said. "Were you aware that the modification significantly altered the distribution between beneficiaries?" Another pause. "Yes." My father shifted beside him. "Lucas," he started, but Mr. Whitmore raised a hand slightly. "Please allow him to answer independently." Lucas exhaled. "I knew it was different," he said. "I didn't know every detail." Mr. Whitmore nodded. "Did you question the change?" Lucas looked down at the table, then back up. "No, that was it. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just final." Mr. Whitmore closed the first section of the file. "Sequence and awareness are established," he said. My father leaned forward. "That's not enough to determine intent," he said. "It is sufficient to determine eligibility under the directive," Mr. Whitmore replied. Karen Doyle spoke next. "We've also reviewed supporting correspondence," she said, "including the archived communications between George Hayes and the advisor." My father didn't react outwardly, but I saw it. That slight tightening in his jaw. He knew. "This correspondence confirms that limited disclosure to Ms. Hayes was requested," Karen continued, "and that awareness was the primary condition for disqualification." She looked at me. "Your documentation has been authenticated." I nodded once. No reaction beyond that, because this wasn't the moment to celebrate. It was the moment to stay precise. Lucas let out a quiet breath. "So what happens now?" he asked. Mr. Whitmore turned to the final section of the file. "We apply the directive," he said. "No build-up, no pause, just execution. Based on the established sequence, documented correspondence, and verified statements." He looked down briefly, then back up. "Mr. Lucas Hayes is deemed ineligible due to prior awareness of the revised allocation without objection." Lucas didn't argue, didn't react immediately. He just sat there, still. "Processing," Mr. Whitmore continued. "Ms. Daisy Hayes is deemed eligible contingent on the absence of contradictory evidence." My father spoke instantly. "There is contradictory context," he said. All eyes turned to him. He leaned forward, voice controlled. "She's not inexperienced," he said. "She works in compliance. She understands financial structures. You're telling me she didn't question anything she signed?" I held his gaze. "I questioned what I was shown," I said. "You controlled what I saw." He didn't flinch. But he didn't have a response either. Karen Doyle looked at him. "Do you have documentation supporting that claim?" she asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. There was nothing he could produce that changed the sequence, or the evidence, or the directive itself. Mr. Whitmore closed the file. "Then the determination stands," he said. That was it. No dramatic conclusion, no raised voices, just a final statement that couldn't be adjusted. Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling again. Then he let out a quiet laugh. Not mocking this time, just tired. "I guess he really thought this through," he said. No one disagreed. My father didn't say anything, not because he accepted it, but because there was nothing left to argue. Control only works when there's room to shape the outcome. There wasn't any more. Everything had already been defined and proven. Mr. Whitmore gathered the documents into a single stack. "We'll proceed with account transfer authorization," he said. "Final access will be granted upon completion of standard processing." I nodded. Understood. As the meeting ended, chairs moved, folders closed, people stood, but the room felt quieter than before. Not tense, not heavy, resolved. Lucas stood up slowly. He looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Apologize. Explain. But instead, he just nodded once. Not agreement. Not approval. Just acknowledgement. Then he walked out. My father stayed seated for a second longer. Then he stood too. When he looked at me, there was no anger left. Just distance. "You made your point," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "I followed the structure." That was the difference. And he knew it. Because this wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving what had already been set in motion and letting it finish. As I walked out of the building, the weight I'd been carrying since that first meeting didn't disappear. But it changed. It wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was finality. And for the first time, that felt like something I could actually stand on. The transfer didn't happen instantly. Of course it didn't. There were forms to sign, identity verifications, compliance checks, ironically the same kind of process I worked with every day. Nothing about it felt dramatic. No grand moment where everything changed at once. Just a series of confirmations, emails, secure logins, a final authorization call. And then one morning the account appeared. $740,000. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like something being released. Not to me. To the process that had been building long before I understood it. I stared at the number for a long time, not because of what it meant financially, but because of what it represented. My grandfather hadn't chosen me. He had chosen a condition, and I happened to meet it. That distinction mattered more than anything else. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone outside of Maya. I didn't post anything. Didn't call. Relatives didn't try to correct the narrative because the truth didn't need to be announced. It had already been documented. What I did instead was simple. I paid off my student loans. All of them. Not because I had to. Because I could finally close that chapter without carrying the weight of how it started. Then I moved the rest into a long-term structured, diversified, conservative, nothing aggressive. The kind of system my grandfather would have respected. No shortcuts, no emotional decisions, just stability. I didn't hear from Lucas for a while. Weeks. Then a message came. Not an apology, not really. Just, I didn't think it would play out like that. I read it once. Then again, and realized something. He wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about the structure, the idea that something had been designed beyond him, beyond all of us. I typed a response, deleted it, then sent something simpler. Neither did I. That was enough. My parents didn't reach out, not directly, but I heard things, through extended family. Through the kind of quiet channels that carry information without ever claiming ownership. He's upset. She thinks you took it too far. They didn't expect you to push back like that. I didn't respond to any of it. because for the first time, I wasn't part of that system anymore. Not emotionally, not structurally. I didn't need to correct their version of events. I just needed to maintain mine. A month later, I went back to Naperville, not for a confrontation, not for closure, just to pick up a few things I'd left behind. The house felt the same, but I didn't. My mom was there. She opened the door, surprised to see me, but not unkind. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend. We just stood there for a second, acknowledging the distance. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said. "I didn't come back," I replied. "I just needed a few things." She nodded. "Let me in. No questions, no tension. Just quiet." As I walked through the house, I noticed something I hadn't before. How much of it had always been about control, not in an obvious way, but in the small things. Who decided what was discussed, what was explained, what was assumed, and what was left unsaid. I went to my old room, packed what I needed, and came back downstairs. My mom was in the kitchen again. Same place, same posture, like nothing had changed, but everything had. "You could have handled it differently," she said. I paused. Maybe I said. She turned to look at me. "It didn't have to go that far." I held her gaze. "It already had," I said. She didn't argue, didn't agree either, just accepted that this was where things were now. I picked up my bag. "Take care, Mom. You too," she said. And that was it. No resolution, no repair, just a boundary. Driving back to Chicago, I thought about my grandfather. Not what he left, but how he left it. He didn't try to control people. He built something that made control irrelevant. Something that responded to behavior instead of promises. Something that didn't need trust to function, just clarity. And I realized something else. The real inheritance wasn't the account. It was the framework. The understanding that you don't need to fight for fairness when you can build systems that reveal it. I didn't lose my family, but I stopped trying to earn my place in it. And that changed everything. Sometimes the hardest part isn't being treated unfairly, it's realizing how long you accepted it because it was framed as normal. What I learned from all of this wasn't about money, it was about clarity, about understanding that boundaries aren't punishments, they're definitions. They tell people where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. And sometimes the people who benefit from your silence will call those boundaries selfish. That doesn't make them wrong, it makes them uncomfortable. There's a difference between revenge and accountability. Revenge is emotional, it tries to hurt back. Accountability is structural. It lets actions carry consequences. I didn't take anything from my family. I stopped letting them decide for me. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't mean restoring access. It means letting go of the need for them to understand. If you've ever been in a situation where something was taken from you under the name of family, I'd really like to hear your experience. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And if stories like this speak to you about boundaries, clarity, and rebuilding your sense of self, consider subscribing. This story is fictional and created for entertainment, education, and reflection.